Good morning, church. We are so thankful for everyone being here today. We're thankful for our members. We're thankful for those who may be watching us online. We're thankful for our guests, and we hope if you're a guest here that you'll hang around afterwards and give us a chance to meet you. Corey and his family and the Careys and our teens and maybe some others are at Winterfest this weekend. And so we want to be praying for them. We hope it will be an uplifting time, spiritually uplifting for our young people. And we certainly want to pray for their safety in returning. So about a month ago, Corey contacted me, and he asked if I had plans for today. And I assumed he wanted to take me out for my birthday. I assumed Corey wanted to maybe hand me a birthday present today. Instead, he asked if I could preach for him. That was his gift to me. So yes, I am officially entering my 60s today, or as Retta would call it, young adulthood. But getting to preach really is a gift. It's one of the greatest gifts, in fact, so I appreciate the opportunity. Having said that, if Corey would like to get me an actual gift when he returns, I'm open to that. I am registered at Bed Bath & Beyond, so I'll just put that out there. But we've been studying the 7 I am statements of Jesus. These are ways that Jesus describes who he is, what he came to do. They also help us to understand what he wants us to do. And we find that God uses I am statements throughout the Bible to describe himself. The first example of that, the first instance of that is in Exodus 3. So the context here is God is sending Moses to Pharaoh to demand that Pharaoh let his people go. And Moses is understandably nervous. He's about to have a talk with the most powerful person in the world at the time. And so God wants to reassure Moses. He tells Moses to tell Pharaoh that I am sent you. Before that time, God had called God's people had called him Elohim, and that's more of a title than a name. But now he's giving the people his personal name. He's saying, I am. That's what I am. I am. And it's showing us and it's showing them the significance and power of who God is. He is in all things. He has created all things. He is before all things, and he will exist after all things. God is I am. It's a definitive statement that he is God. It's a personalized name that will end up being used over 300 times throughout the Bible. And so when Jesus uses this statement here in John and elsewhere, he's saying he's not just a normal person. He's not just a good teacher. He is God in the flesh. And so in these 7 I am statements that we're covering, he puts some words on the end to further reveal who he is and how he cares for us. And so Corey has done 2 sermons so far in this series. He began with I am the bread of life. And last week, as was mentioned earlier, he talked about I am the light of the world. And so today we're going to focus on Jesus being the good shepherd. And I appreciate that reading from Michael. If you haven't opened up to John 10, 11 to 18, we're going to spend some time there this morning. I think people love this passage, and I think they love the companion passage in Psalm 23. In fact, I haven't done a lot of funerals, preached a lot of funerals, but in every one that I've done, the family has always requested that Psalm 23 be read. I think it's maybe one of the most popular verses that, or chapters that's read at funerals. Well, why is that? I think it's because the image of the shepherd runs deep. It resonates with us. He's the one who takes me to calm places. He's the one who restores my aching heart. He's the one who provides me with safety and with peace and with deep satisfaction. And so this shepherd metaphor that we read about touches a deep nerve, and it awakens a deep yearning in us. And Jesus knows that his listeners are familiar with Psalm 23. And so he touches that nerve and he says, and here I am, friend. I am the good shepherd. I am the one you seek. What an astonishing claim. And so this morning, as familiar as John 10 and Psalm 23 and the Good Shepherd metaphor is, I'm going to ask you to resist the urge this morning to think, I already know that. I've heard this 100 times, right? It's a very familiar passage. I challenge you today to see if you have truly incorporated the presence of Jesus as a shepherd in your understanding of God. What does it mean for us to have Jesus as our shepherd? And if Corey were here, he would want to take a moment and have you just pause for a second and reflect on that. What does it mean to have Jesus as a shepherd, and what does it mean for us to be his sheep? What does that mean? What do we have to do? What does it mean that Jesus the shepherd has got to be everything to you? I want us to reflect on that this morning. Well, the first thing to note, when the Bible talks about us as sheep, it's not a very flattering thing. Have you ever noticed that there's a wild of just about everything? We have wild horses, we have wild cats, we have wild dogs, but there's no wild sheep. Why is that? Well, it's because sheep are too dim-witted and helpless to be wild. If you let a typical animal go out, you give them their freedom, one of two things is going to happen. Either the animal goes wild or the animal comes home, but not sheep. You let a sheep out to roam and it is going to wander aimlessly. You give another animal its freedom and it's like, aha, you remember the song Born Free? They take off into the woods, they've been given their freedom, they love it. You give a sheep its freedom and it's going to say, where am I? Who's going to get me supper? What's going on here? Okay? You let a horse go without a rancher, the horse goes wild. You let a sheep go without a shepherd, the sheep dies. There's no sense of direction. There's no discernment about what to eat. In fact, I read this week that if you allow a sheep to go near poisonous plants, it'll just eat them. Okay? It just doesn't know any better. It'll just graze away. It has no way to protect itself. A sheep can get caught on its back like a turtle and not be able to get back up, and it'll just die there. And therefore, a sheep is totally dependent on the shepherd. And thus, a shepherd has to live with the sheep. The shepherd never goes home. He sleeps with the sheep. He lives with the sheep. He's always there. The shepherd is the sheep's protector and provider and physician. The shepherd is the leader and guide and owner. The shepherd is everything to the sheep. So what are the implications for us? This morning, let's consider what that means. I know it sounds wonderful to say, the Lord is my shepherd. It just kind of rolls off the tongue. We love to sing these beautiful songs about Jesus, our shepherd. We just sang one. We're going to sing another one later. We love to sing the songs. When people hear about Psalm 23, and when they read that passage, sometimes they'll cry. There's a lot of sentimentality there. It reminds us maybe of our youth. When I thought about it this week, I thought of being in a Bible class as a little kid, and we had little fuzzy sheep that were up on flannel boards, and it's kind of a touching concept. There's a lot of sentimentality there. But are we really letting the truth hit us? This morning, church, will we allow the truth to hit us? Will you allow the truth to hit you? What does it really mean that the Lord is your shepherd? What are the implications? What does it mean that Jesus, the Good Shepherd, has to mean everything to you? Everything. What does it mean when Jesus says in John 15, without me, you can do nothing? Can I speak bluntly to you this morning? Will you allow me to do that? Well, here it is. I don't think we believe that. We don't. Everything in our heart, I think, works against that concept. We might like the sound of the Lord is my shepherd, but there's a part of us that kind of hates that. We hate the truth of it. We hate the implications. Allow me to explain. If you're like me, you basically believe that you're a pretty good person. You probably think of yourself as more intelligent than most, and you can generally make the right decisions except in a pinch. So we don't really need a good shepherd per se. Most of us just want a consultant, someone who is on retainer and will come when we need him, right? Does that sound familiar to anybody? Am I getting any head nods here? Okay, I got a hand up there. That's good. Folks, a shepherd is different, completely different. Let's face the fact, you need a shepherd and I need a shepherd. Let me illustrate it this way. If I could go back in a time machine to 10 years ago and I could have a conversation with your 10 years ago self, and I could tell you about all the foolish, sinful things you're going to do in the next 10 years, if I had an absolute record of what was going to happen and the choices you were going to make and the things you were going to say and the sins you were going to commit, what would your 10-year-ago self say to me? He'd say, "Who do you think I am? I'd never do such a thing. But look at what you've done. Look at what I've done. Look at the mistakes that you and I have made." As Everett read to us in class this morning from Isaiah 53:6, all like sheep have gone astray. All, that's all of us. We have turned everyone to his own way. And I want that thought to stick with you. We have turned to his own way. The fact is, you need a shepherd and I need a shepherd, and let's just admit that this morning. So this morning, if we can have the slide there, this morning I want to suggest 3 things we have to do to practice his shepherdhood and to incorporate it into our understanding of Jesus. 3 pretty simple concepts, but they have pretty profound implications. First of all, we have to obey him comprehensively. We have to obey him existentially, that is moment to moment, and we have to obey him joyfully. So let's kind of peel the onion back on these 3 concepts, and I hope they'll be useful to you. First of all, let's talk about obeying Jesus comprehensively. I think most of us believe to some degree that we kind of obey God. We're kind of moral. We kind of have standards. We're not bad people, right? But to practice his presence as a shepherd in your life, you have to obey him comprehensively. You see, a sheep cannot say to the shepherd, "Okay, you can help me over here, but not over here. I can handle this over here. I can do that piece on my own." But you see, we do that with God all the time. We say, "Sure, this is an area I'd be very happy to listen to you on, but this area over here, that's kind of hands off. You're kind of getting into my business there, God." The late Tim Keller shared a story that I read about a woman that he had counseled personally who was going through a marriage crisis. She had had an ongoing affair with a secret lover. And so Keller's talking to her and trying to counsel her through this terrible, part of her life. She said that whenever her lover came into her home while her husband was away, she was very careful to place every picture of him face down. Why? Well, she said, "I didn't want the thought of looking at him and him looking at me." What she meant was I couldn't bear to have eye contact with him. I had excluded him from that part of my life. Well, Christians, aren't there areas of our life where instead of being sheep, you say, "Lord, I need you over here and over here and over there. I welcome your presence there. But in this area and this area and this area, I will not look you in the eye. This is an area where I have excluded you." So when I'm sick, maybe perhaps I'm dealing with cancer, well, I welcome your shepherding of my health. If I'm up for a promotion, God, wow, your shepherding would be really helpful here. I'd really like to get that promotion. But over there, my finances, well, they're good. I don't need your involvement there. I don't need your shepherding. I've got a handle on that, God. I don't really need you. I got you on retainer. I don't need you really involved in that part of my life. Aren't there places like that, Christians? Places where you have lowered the photo so God can't see in? If so, you're denying the shepherdhood of God. You're not treating him as a shepherd. He's merely a part-time consultant. Aren't there areas like that? Aren't there areas that you've excluded from him? And so this morning, this first idea, it's critical to see that the relationship between the shepherd and the sheep is one of comprehensive intimacy. He lives with the sheep. He's always there. There's no area in which he can be excluded. There's no area in which you can turn the picture down so that he can't see in. You see, if Jesus was only a king, only a father, only a judge, only a friend, only a rock or refuge or warrior, as great as those images are, those kinds of people or things only have access to one area of your life. But a shepherd has full access to everything. Not one area of your life can be excluded. Not one. So we must obey God comprehensively. No area of our lives can be off limits to his shepherding. And so I ask you this morning, is that how you view Jesus, the Good Shepherd? Have you opened up his shepherding to every area of his life? Number two, to practice the presence of God as shepherd, we must obey him existentially. And that's kind of a big word, especially for some of you younger folks, but that simply means moment by moment we are depending on the shepherd. You see, a sheep knows that it has no strength. It knows it has no smarts. It asks, where am I? Where's my supper? Where'd everybody go? I've fallen and I can't get up. It is clueless from sunup to sundown. So as a result of that, existentially, that is moment by moment, they're completely dependent on the shepherd. That's a critical concept, folks, and it's a discipline that will completely turn your life around if you're willing to do it. So Janet and I have moved a lot in our lives. I grew up in a military family. I served in the military myself. When we moved here, it was my 26th move, in 60 years. So I've been around a bit. And when I arrive in a new town like St. Louis, I'm aware that I don't know my way around, I'm a newcomer, I'm not savvy, and I'm aware of that. And so when we got here this past April, I knew that I was dumb about the Lou. When people talked about taking I-64 to 270 to 44, I smiled and shrugged because I was clueless. I had no idea what they were talking about. And so when traveling early on this past spring, I knew I had to prepare beforehand. I talked to people like my son Kyle about which coffee shops to visit and the best way to get there. I always plugged in destinations in my car nav system. I kept myself in what you might call a dependent condition, talking to people, Googling locations, and relying on my map software. And guess what? I never got lost. But now I know where I'm going. I have figured things out. I've been here nearly a year. I'm savvy. I don't rely nearly as much on Kyle anymore. I don't always plug in destinations because, well, I've been there before. I got this. I'm self-sufficient. So now guess what? I get lost. What am I doing in Maplewood? I was trying to get to Kirkwood. What happened? You see, when I felt the most disoriented, ironically, I was the most oriented because I relied on others and on technology. Again, I felt disoriented, and in those moments, because I relied on others, I was the most oriented. On the other hand, when I felt the most independent, the most savvy, relying solely on myself, I was the most disoriented, and I got lost. Well, a sheep is the same way. It's fine so long as it relies totally on the shepherd, moment by moment, day by day. However, when a sheep thinks that it has figured things out and only needs a shepherd part-time, it's in for a world of hurt. Christians, what I'm describing here is an amazing concept. I hope it will sink into your brains this morning. I think it's a key to living the Christian life. How do you think Paul could say, when I am weak, then I am strong? How could Paul say that? Well, when you live existentially, that is moment by moment, as a sheep, under the complete guidance and direction of the shepherd, there's no end to the great things you can do. It's all about the shepherd. Your orientation, your direction, your security, your thoughts, your entire life is in the hands of the shepherd. If you grab a hold of that idea and practice it, it is a discipline that will revolutionize your life and revolutionize your faith. It simply means moment by moment, I'm crying out to him. Hour by hour, I'm talking to him. I'm running things by him. Paul says, pray without ceasing. That's kind of his way to say it. I recognize that he's the good shepherd and I'm the clueless sheep. So here's some homework for you guys. Got to give you some homework. When you wake up tomorrow, I want you to make a list of the 4 or 5 temptations you're probably going to encounter that day. Think your day ahead. You know yourself. You know what typically is going to trip you up. So think your day ahead. When am I most likely to get angry and snap at my wife or children? When am I most likely to lust or gossip? When am I most likely to be prideful? In what work scenario am I most likely to get frustrated and lash out at someone? You know yourself. So what temptations are likely coming up for you tomorrow? Make a list of 4 or 5 of them. And then here's how this discipline works. You cry out to the shepherd regularly throughout the day, and especially as you're about to encounter the scenario where the temptation is likely to occur. You cry out, you pray to God. You turn toward the good shepherd like a helpless sheep. It's a mental discipline that goes like this. I'll give you an example. When someone's aggravating you, what do you say? You say, dear shepherd, I know that I am far more of an aggravation to you than this person is to me. Let me remember that, and because of what you've done, let me be patient. What happens when success comes to you? When you get a promotion or somebody tells you how great you are? You say, dear shepherd, I know who I am. I realize this could just as easily have turned out the other way. This is all you're doing. This is nothing but a gift, so I give you all the glory. You see how you got out in front of that scenario? You got out in front of that sin or that temptation to be prideful, and you turn to the shepherd? What happens when a failure shows up or a difficulty? What would you say to the shepherd then? How about this? Dear shepherd, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. You see, he's with you every minute. He's holding you up every second, Christians. He's got you, and he's got me. The least we can do is turn to him, submit to him, and let him shepherd us. We're constantly turning to God. We're constantly following his GPS rather than our own. When I first read Psalm 23 as a young person, and for many years after that, quite frankly, I tried to visualize the line, he makes me lie down in green pastures. I tried to imagine that. And what I imagined when I read green pastures is this massive field of lush green grass. I pictured something like Julie Andrews would run through in The Sound of Music, just frolicking in this giant pasture, this deep grass, very lush, very green. Or I pictured the fields that I hiked through on the Appalachian Trail, where you look out on the horizon and there is green grass as far as the eye can see. That's where my Savior leads me to eat, right? These giant fields of lush green grass. That's what I imagined. And the implication of that would be, well, I get to hang out there for a while. I can wander around on my own for a while, munching on grass, this giant field of grass. And then Janet and I traveled to the Holy Lands, and we spent some time in the Judean wilderness. And on one day, we even got to observe some shepherds with their flocks up on a hill in a distance. And we had a guide that was kind of giving us commentary on some of the things that we were seeing. Well, you know what you don't find in the Judean wilderness? Large, lush fields of grass. You're not going to find them there. They don't exist there. What you find are tufts of grass, small patches. And what you'll observe there is a shepherd will lead his flock along a rutted path to one of these small patches of grass, just enough grass to sustain him maybe for a few hours or perhaps for the day, and then it's time to move on to the next tuft of grass. And so what happens is the next morning, the shepherd gathers his things and he prepares to head off down the path. Well, if you're a sheep and you want to eat again or drink from still water again and not drown, you better follow him. You better follow his voice and stay on the path and follow the shepherd. You see, the shepherd sustains the flock moment by moment, day by day, hour by hour, but only when they trust him, submit to him, and follow him. And when we do that, Christians, we can say what David said in Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." So we got to obey him comprehensively. We got to obey him existentially, that is moment by moment. And lastly, we need to obey him joyfully. You may think of Jesus as a judge or a king or even a father, and that's wonderful, but you must also think of him as a shepherd, as a good shepherd, and then you're going to obey him joyfully. In this John 10 passage that Michael read, specifically verses 12 and 13, Jesus is saying, "I am not a hireling." You see, there were two kinds of shepherds back then. There were those that were hired by the owners of the sheep. They were in it for the money. And then there were those that actually owned the sheep. That is Jesus to us. He owns us. He's all in. We must get the implication of that, okay? In the Near East, a shepherd's entire wealth was the sheep. The sheep were the shepherd's pride and joy and honor and wealth. They were his glory. The sheep were everything the shepherd owned. Jesus is saying, "You, church, are my pride. You are my joy. You are my glory." Paul picks up on this theme in Ephesians 1:23 when he says about the church that you are God's fullness or God's pleroma, the glory of God. Now we have to be careful here. The Bible tells us that the name of God is I am that I am. God is self-sufficient. He doesn't need us actually, right? What this must mean is that God has voluntarily bound up his honor and his glory and his joy with our honor, glory, and joy, so that our joy and honor is his joy and honor. Well, what does that mean? What does it mean in Isaiah 49 when it says, "Jerusalem, your sons will return to you, and you will wear them as ornaments"? To the parents in the audience this morning, how could a son or a daughter be considered an ornament to you? Think about that for a moment. Have you ever watched parents at an awards banquet for one of their children? It's a fascinating thing. Everyone's looking at the stage. I like looking at the parent's eyes. If I know the parent of the child that's going to get an award, I like looking at the parent's eyes. You'll see them beaming or crying with joy. Why is that? Or what about a parent at a jail because their son or daughter has been arrested and brought in? There's incredible shame on the parent's face. Why is that? Well, in a good parent-child relationship, the parents treasure the child and love the child and live for the child. When the child does well, the parent feels glorified. When the child gets an award, in a sense, they're saying, my father or mother are also deserving. They raised me. They helped shape me. Part of this award belongs to them. And it's the same when the child is shamed. The parents feel it. Because the parents treasure a child so much, their glory and honor and joy are locked up in the prospects of their child. So let me give you a little example of this from my family. So when our youngest son Kyle was in 10th grade down in Florida, he played linebacker on the JV football team. And Janet and I always went to the games. We always cheered him on. Well, during one game, Kyle picked off a pass around midfield and started returning it toward the end zone. And I stood up on my feet and I started screaming like a little schoolgirl. I said, "Go Kyle, pick 6. That's my boy, just like I taught him." I'm tapping other parents and making sure everybody's watching, right? It was a joyful moment. And I shared in that joy. I shared in that glory, right? Because I was his father. And just as Kyle was about to go into the end zone, he was caught from behind and tackled at the 1-yard line. And I yelled, "Oh no, whose kid is that? What a loser." No, I didn't yell that. But I was frustrated, right? I was pained a little bit because he didn't score and he was my child and his teammates were razzing him. And those of you that know him, if given the opportunity, razz him about that, okay? You have my permission. But I felt his shame, so to speak, because he was my son. If he had scored, I would have been part of the joy, part of the glory, but because he didn't score, I was feeling some of that shame. What Jesus is saying is, you sheep are my joy. You, church, are my glory. What you do affects me. Every other religion, I would say, gives you an ethical system that says, do this because it is right. It will make society better. Christianity is the only system that says, do this, be obedient to bring glory and honor to God. Do this so that you do not grieve the Spirit of God, Ephesians 4:30. So what does it mean to grieve? Well, I looked that up. It means to suffer a shattering, crucial personal loss. Christians, we can grieve the Holy Spirit. Have you considered that? That's a pretty terrifying concept. When you grasp that God is your shepherd, it means you joyfully obey him because he owns you and he wants what is best for you. He loves you. He's the good shepherd. And you want to reciprocate that by obeying him, not grudgingly, but joyfully. Why? To bring him glory and honor and joy. And he is shattered, or he is grieved when he sees you do something that is going to harm you. He's grieved when you turn down the picture to him on a part of your life. The shepherd says, "You are my joy and my honor, and all my commands to you are merely expressions of my commitment to your joy, because I want the very best life for you." If you understand that concept, if you can get that, that becomes an engine in your life. It's a completely unique driving force to be prized and to be treasured. And not everyone has that, and I can tell you I struggle with it. So this morning I would ask you, what is it that drives you? What is the engine that gets you up in the morning? What's that engine? The genius of the Christian faith is this, that I know my shepherd loves me and adores me. And his honor is actually bound up in how I do. And his joy is bound up in how I do. And all the things that he asks me to do are simply expressions of his commitment to my joy. And so in order for us to obey the Good Shepherd joyfully, you'll have to understand that you are his joy and his honor. He prizes you. You are his treasure. He wants you to dive across the goal line and score, as I did with Kyle. That makes me want to joyfully follow him. I want to please him. I want to get pleasure in being obedient to him. And until you understand that, something else is going to drive you. Something else will be the engine of your life, right? So let's reflect again. We want to obey him comprehensively in all areas of our life. We never turn down a part of our life to God. We want to obey him existentially, moment by moment, constantly turning to him, and we want to obey him joyfully. If he's going to be your good shepherd, that's how you have to treat him. And what does he do for us? Well, we could spend a whole other sermon on that. We won't. But let me summarize. He lays down his life for his sheep, right there in John 10. He protects his sheep from attacks. He will not abandon his sheep. He cares for his sheep, even at great cost to himself. He searches for his sheep when they are lost, and he brings them into his pen. He knows his sheep by name. Christians, he knows you by name, and he loves his sheep. Consider this for a moment. Jesus knows you completely, inside and out, and still loves you. There's nothing that you can do to surprise him. If you feel like you're too far gone, maybe you're sitting here this morning, you're thinking, man, I've got a messed up life, I've made a lot of mistakes, I'm just too far gone. If you're thinking that this morning, you don't understand the work of the shepherd, because he seeks you out constantly, not begrudgingly, but because he loves you, because it's his job. He knows that his sheep will stray sometimes. Let me close with a final illustration. A young Russian officer had been embezzling funds from his troop. He realized he was going to be found out and decided to kill himself. So he got drunk but inadvertently passed out. The Tsar himself came into the room and looked at the books that the young man had opened and was passed out over. The Tsar figured out what had happened, and he wrote a note that read, "I will make good the debt," and he put his seal on it. The young man eventually came to his senses, and he looked down and realized the Tsar had looked into the books. The Tsar had seen everything. He thought, he has seen my heart and seen my sin all the way to the bottom, and he still will redeem me. And that's what the John 10 passage is saying. You have a shepherd that has seen your sin all the way to the bottom. He knows you inside and out, and yet he says, I will lay down my life. Well, what kind of freedom did that Russian soldier know? I would say a freedom like he had never known before, when he realized that someone had seen his sin to the bottom and decided to redeem him anyway. In the same way, Christians, have you ever realized the glorious release of realizing that your shepherd knows you to the bottom and loves you to the skies? Has that hit home with you? Have you owned that? He lays down his life for the sheep. It's right there in verse 11. In the Greek, for means instead of. He's saying, I lay down my life for the sheep. Jesus, the good shepherd, glorifies in his substitution for us. Okay, he glorifies in that. He's saying, I die in the dark so that they can live in the light. I take their cross so they can have my crown. I take their punishment so they can have my reward. I die instead of them. Yes, they're sheep. Yes, they're foolish. Yes, they're rebellious. But this is the reason they can be in my glory and my joy. This is the reason I can love them in spite of their wrongdoings. I lay down my life for the sheep. Yes, the poor, dim-witted, clueless, wandering sheep. That's you and me. So this morning, I want to challenge you to commit or recommit to following the Good Shepherd. That's our challenge this morning. How can we do that? We can obey him comprehensively. No area of your life is turned down to him. We need to obey him existentially. That is moment by moment. We're crying out to him. We're praying to him constantly. We're in the Word. We're constantly looking at our shepherd for his guidance throughout the day like a sheep. And then we want to obey him joyfully, knowing that his joy and honor is bound up in our own. When you do that, folks, you find rest. You can know peace because he's got you. He knows your heart. He knows your name. He knows your faults, and yet he still loves you. You could say he knows you to the bottom, but he loves you to the skies. Friends, he's the good, good shepherd. To have a relationship with him, to come under his watchful care, you've got to admit you're a lost, foolish sheep. We just got to admit that, right? You've got to admit you need him. You've got to admit that he's your only hope. So this morning, we're going to sing a song here in a minute. We would be happy to talk to you about becoming a Christian, establishing a relationship with your Lord and Savior and Shepherd. Or maybe you would like for us to pray for you. Maybe you would like for some restoration in your faith life. Maybe you've turned down the picture to Jesus on some areas of your life and you would like prayers about that. If that's the case, you can come forward this morning or you can go in the back and seek out one of the elders who will be glad to help you. Let's stand and sing.